Now, here are your hosts, Dominick and Michael Hartzman.
All right, I'm Michael Hartzman. Today is Tuesday, May 2nd, 2023, and I'm on, as always, with my partner, Dominick. Good evening, Dom. How are you?
Doing well, Mike. No complaints. How about yourself?
Everything's all right. No complaints on my side either. It finally stopped raining, so mazel tov for that.
Sure, because the weekend is done, Mike. So now that the weekend is done, we can have the rain stop. Nice way to destroy a beautiful weekend.
Yeah, but my grass looks great, Dominick.
That's the important thing. Yes. The markets don't, Mike. I think you were being very issuing a prophecy last week, and I think your prophecy came to be. Headline risk came full force today.
Yeah, it really, really did. And I was gonna mention the same thing to you. First Republic finally going under. It's kind of a new story, but it's really not a new story, right? Let's just get that out of the way. 6 or 7 weeks ago with the banking crisis, it were two banks who went out right away, and First Republic was kind of teeter-tottering, and then their earnings came out, and that was the end of the show. But it's unfortunate. They are now officially the second largest bank to fail in this country. But that was kind of, in my opinion, Dominick, the other shoe to drop. And then, yeah, what we talked about last week with the headline risk with the debt ceiling has definitely become front and center.
Yeah, well, Mike, just getting the math right, we had the second and third largest banks in U.S. history fail, and now with this most recent one over the weekend, it was taken over. Now we have the second, third, and fourth largest banks in the history of this country, and we hope to God that that's the end of it. But it would not be surprised. They may not be quite as large as First Republic and Signature and Silicon Valley, but there probably are some other ones sitting out there in the weeds. And this is part of the cleansing process, unfortunately, where the weak players get taken out. And in the case of First Republic, JP Morgan Chase came in and acquired them. So the strong, the large get stronger and larger, and the weak end up disappearing.
Yep, it's kind of an age-old story, but I think what really has rattled the market, Dominick, and again, we talked about it. I saw some of the headlines last week. The Janet Yellen came out yesterday and said, the government's going to run out of money in early June. Biden's finally going to get some of these congressmen to the table, and I still believe that there will be a resolution. But the headlines are going to be, gut-wrenching for the next 4 weeks, in my opinion.
Yeah, Mike, you brought it up last week that the headline risk of this idea that the U.S. government, the United States of America, was going to default on its interest payments, on its debt, that's going to scare the living daylights out of the markets. And we got a good taste of it today. We've said from day one, rational people at the end of the day will come to the table and come up with a rational answer. So we don't expect that to happen. But just the conversation alone scares the market, scares people. And this is usually what happens, and markets go in correction mode. And we got a good taste of it today.
You used a great word, rational. Because I heard this morning, I didn't hear it myself, I heard this morning a fairly prominent financial news person, not one of my favorites.
A talking head.
Yeah, basically said, let the government fold. The Republicans should not negotiate with Biden. Let the chips fall where they may. Which to me is, kind of irresponsible just to throw lob that grenade out there.
It's irresponsible, Mike. And frankly, even the Republicans have stated they have no intention whatsoever to allow the U.S. government to default on its debt. So the key is that they want a negotiating stance. Both sides want to take their position. Hopefully, and we keep using the word rational, common sense in these discussions. And we hope to God they are rational and do use a little common sense. But we both believe at the end of the day, it'll get resolved.
Dominick, even if they're not rational, they have to use common sense, because you know what? Republicans have 401ks and own treasury notes. And guess what? Democrats have 401ks and own treasury notes. So, people vote with their wallet all the
Yeah,
time.
look, and I'm not saying it's split down the middle, but half of the Republican voters and half of the Democratic voters are at the end of the day going to look at their own pocketbooks,
Right.
their own bank accounts, their own 401ks, and if they're not happy with the results, they're going to vote somebody out of office. And
Correct.
I don't believe these people don't get that part of it. I believe they do get it, Mike.
Well, no. If politicians are anything, Dominic, they're survivors, right? They're like cockroaches in a nuclear war. They're the ones who know how to survive.
I'm going to let you be the guy to call politicians cockroaches, and I'll leave that alone. But we do think that this presents both a challenge and an opportunity where the markets, I think, over the next couple of weeks can get pretty volatile. Might get pretty frightening. I believe I heard this stat right. The last time we had this kind of confrontation was the Obama administration in 2011, and I think the S&P corrected by 19% before common sense came back into the picture and recovered by year-end, by the way. So I hope to God we don't see anything like that, but we are prepared. And that kind of volatility also presents a terrific opportunity, Mike. So hopefully we'll have an opportunity, we'll have that opportunity in front of us and we can take advantage of it.
Right. Because even Dominic, even in the unlikely event that Joe Biden and Kevin McCarthy pull a Thelma and Louise, right, and they drive over the cliff, eventually it's going to get resolved.
Yes, if you're on a roll tonight, yes, they can pull a Thelma and Louise and drive over the cliff. But for our purposes, and we don't want to mention specific companies, but these companies, very well known, very high branded, high quality, companies that make profits. If they're discounted because there's fear in the market, we get an opportunity to go buy those companies at a nice discounted price. And ultimately, things do get resolved, and over time, prices of stocks comes back higher, and then we don't look so dumb. So we are in a position where we can take advantage of the volatility.
No, I'm completely confident in our ability to do that. And as you said, we've been preparing for a while. Story number 2, it's more than a headline. The Fed's a meeting. There's going to be an announcement tomorrow at 2:00. I'm going to put you on the spot. What's your prediction for tomorrow as it relates to interest rates?
Well, I don't think I'm going too far on a limb, Mike. The market expects 0.25%, and that will not either make the market all jolly or depressed, but it's always the interview afterwards that Chairman Powell gives and his tone in that interview, and whether his briefcase is open or he brought one or he used a comma and he paused between words. The interpretation of his words will ultimately dictate where the market goes. And there is a sense that he will be a little softer in his tone and maybe even hint that they might be done raising interest rates for the balance of this year. That might be a little bit too much wishful thinking, but I think they are close to being done raising interest rates for the year, Mike.
So I agree with you. I think it's 25 basis points. And I think his language is important. And I would be stunned if he said they were done. I think they're more likely may say they're close to being done rather than, definitively declaring they're done. And I think if they do that, it's still not going to take away for the volatility of dealing with the fiscal deadline. But once that's past us, I think the market, as you said, could start to look a little forward to greener pastures.
Yeah, and Mike, in this infinite insanity of good news is bad news and bad news is good news, we actually don't want too dovish a statement by Chairman Powell, because then the market might fear there's some hidden problem in the economy that we don't know about yet, and that would actually be perceived as negative. We want him to be very diligent about inflation and very proactive about it, but not necessarily be too aggressive. So it's going to be a fine line that he's going to need to walk.
I agree. And it's very nuanced, and I could not agree with you more. Listen, getting to tonight's show, a few weeks ago, we had Harold Balachi on, talk about estate planning. And last week we had Howard Jones on, insurance expert, give us an update on long-term care and what options are there. And I think tonight's guest, Ron Roel, is a great person to button up this topic as it relates to seniors and elder care and estate planning and long-term care. Ron has his own show on Voice America called 45 Forward. Long Island listeners may remember him. He's a pretty prolific writer for Newsday for decades. He's recently written a book called The Caregiving Navigator, and we're looking forward to Ron's comments to really talk about this whole senior elder care, kind of end of life planning, to kind of button up the last few shows that we did.
Obviously, one of the most important topics we deal with almost every day, right, Mike? I mean, we're getting older, our clients are getting older, and everybody's concerned in how to deal with these issues. So I think it's terrific that we have an expert tonight, another expert that can help us provide some intelligent conversation for our clients and our listeners.
So we'll be right back with Ron Roel.
Now, back to the Lebenthal Report.
All right, I'm Michael Hartzman, back with my partner Dominick Tavella and our guest this evening, Ron Roel, the host, of another Voice America podcast, 45 Forward. How are you, Ron?
I'm great, guys. Good to see you.
And welcome back, Ron.
Thanks very much. Glad to be here.
So, Ron, I know your show is geared towards a certain population, a little older. You deal with folks in their 60s and 70s, and they still have parents in their 90s. So I know this subject of aging and aging with dignity and aging in place is very important to you. But why don't we just start kind of right there? What was it about this topic that you've devoted so much of your time, energy, and career to?
Thanks, Michael. Yeah, it goes back really to the early 2000s, and interestingly, when it started really as an editor, when I sat in, I was a business editor and writer, and was covering real estate as well. And I just decided one day I got an invitation to go to a financial planning seminar, interestingly enough. And it was out of that seminar when the presenter started talking about to a mostly older, audience. Well, how long do you think your kids are going to live? Your grandchildren are going to live? And people are like, gee, I don't know, maybe 100, 110, who knows? And so he said, well, how are you going to plan for that kind of life? And it was from that moment I had one of those aha moments, like, wait a minute. Yes, this is about financial planning, so you don't run out of money as we get older and hopefully lead longer and healthier lives. But what do we do with these lives, and how do we plan for it? So I started a section called Act Two, and the premise was that, while a lot of these issues come up in your 50s, late 50s, 60s, 70s, you really need to start thinking earlier than that. So I thought about like the 50-yard line, which people think about in retirement, and I said, well, let's get ahead of that. Let's start and get people thinking about it in the late 40s. Actually, a friend of mine mentioned to me that sort of an interesting analogy, a sports analogy, which he said, the angle at which you throw a football that gets the maximum distance is 45 degrees. And so it was sort of that premise, like to get people thinking ahead of it, recognizing, as you and I have talked before, Dom and Michael, that people don't like to plan. They have what I call sort of facetiously PDD, planning deficit disorder. They don't, they'd spend more time planning for their vacation than retirement. But that's what you got to shoot for, recognizing that that's a reality. People do crisis planning, but try to get them a little ahead of the curve. So that's really the idea behind it, guys. It's really give people recognizing the realities of life and everything that interferes with planning, to try to give people a manual and ideas about how to do it in spite of all the things that get in the way.
Ron, my aha moment is I went to a seminar similar to yours, and the presenter held up a birthday card, and she said to us, it was a 100th birthday card, happy 100th birthday. And she said, if you haven't figured out your clients are going to live to 100, Hallmark has. There were over a dozen cards to choose from for 100th birthday. And on a personal level, I was able to call one of my all-time favorite clients yesterday to wish her a 100th birthday, a happy 100th birthday. So clients are living longer, Ron, and yet either they or we don't get it or are not doing enough planning for it.
Yeah, I agree. Although I think that when I talk to people in your industry, I think that people are starting to put together plans to live to 100 for their clients, whether the clients want it or not. I think that to be conservative, that's what you got to shoot for. And, you never know. The genes never know. Things happen. But I think that's increasingly so. I wrote a piece recently, as the part of an email I send out to people who watch my show. And it was my feature article was about my aunt, who is 101.
Yeah,
And,
God bless.
And she's not in assisted living. I mean, she is in a continuing care community living with her daughter, but she's on the computer. She does painting exhibits for people in her community, does, puts them up around the community, emails her grandchildren, her great grandchildren, sends stuff to me. I got an email this morning from her. So we're living longer, and we're also hopefully living better as we age. But it still requires a lot of planning to do so.
Ron, if you have not trademarked planning deficit disorder, you might want to do that, because I think every financial advisor is going to steal that from you.
Okay. I'll do that.
So where does a family start? I mean, those are very difficult conversations for a child to have a conversation with their parent. Right. So if you're talking about a 45 or 50-year-old child, then maybe you're talking about a parent who's 70, they're still active. They don't feel like they need to do this planning, to your point. So, do you wait for the parent to bring it up? I mean, where does it all start?
Yeah, I think that you need to be prepared for it to start any direction. You're not really sure. You're doing a lot of improvising. It's if you're in a football game, it's like, well, do you start on offense? Well, you start on offense, but then sometimes you're reacting to defense, and you're planning for different scenarios. So sometimes it starts with the adult child, and sometimes it starts with the parent. My caregiving guide, the Caregiving Navigator, it's designed. It's about I predict sort of a 60-40 split. So 60% of it is really precipitated by the adult children, and 40% by the care recipient, the parent, the loved one. It's an inexact science, but I give sort of scenarios in the guide about how to start these conversations. Sometimes the parents get it. I'm going to be one of those parents. Hopefully, I'm not going to wait for my kids to bring this up. I'm going to bring it to them. It's difficult. A lot of, you guys were talking about rational before. That's a great word. Doesn't work so well with family caregiving. The driving piece is emotion on both sides. I mean, you're dealing with mortality. You're dealing with money. You're dealing with siblings. I mean, I have a whole section called, the sibling syndrome, which is recognizing that even when you're sort of all on board about taking care of your parents, often the siblings disagree about how to do that and who's going to be the alpha caregiver, and so you've got to prepare. What I try to do is give different scenarios about how to approach the problem, different strategies depending on what your family is like. So I give a template for starting. If the parent started, or if the adult child starts it, and a series of starter questions, and then go from there. See where it takes you, and be realistic and patient. And Michael, to your point, sometimes you have to wait for the right opportunity. Sometimes you do it casually over family gatherings, at Thanksgiving or Christmas, Hanukkah, and then recognize that it's going to generate a lot of emotion. I mean, I think our generation is much more open financially about this sort of thing. I can tell you that my parents' generation, they did not want to talk about this. They did not want to talk. Sadly, my dad died suddenly, and I was entrusted with trying to figure out what the hell was going on. Where were his assets? Who had them? Who were his advisors? He was a sort of macho guy. He didn't share this information with my mom, so she didn't know. She took care of the daily, the monthly budget, but in terms of knowing, where the assets were, how to prepare for her long-term care, nothing. You had to start. So hopefully, you try to help people avoid that scenario.
Well, Ron, I can tell you both myself and Mike are very proactive, right? And often we get the kids going, "How'd you get mom or dad to agree to that?" And I'm like, "Well, we don't have an axe to grind. We don't have a dog in this fight, right? We're just trying to give the most honest advice." But to your point, use the professionals that are in the mom and dad's life. Talk to the financial advisor, talk to the CPA, talk to the family attorney, and just put the issues on the table to start the conversation. I promise you the conversation is going to flow, right? But somebody's got to light that fuse, and hopefully it's a professional like us or somebody else. But if not, get the kids. Use the family conciliaries to be an assistant on those issues.
Tom, that's great advice. Great advice, because often you have to look for neutral parties. So it doesn't. One son or daughter may want to do one thing or the other, and you need to have a financial advisor. Often it's the financial advisor and the elder law attorney, who can be the most objective sources and kind of keep the conversation on track, try to take the emotion out of it to the extent possible, and resolve differences. There's as you said, it's a conciliary, mediator, and sometimes literally they need to be a mediator, but
Negotiator.
Right.
And to that point, guys, people are living longer, and therefore they also have way more cognitive issues. And in some of the more unpleasant conversations I've had to have is either with a spouse or a child to say, "Hey, is dad okay?" Because, I'm happy to talk to him every day, but he's called me 6 days in a row to ask me the same question. Or, he's forgetting where his accounts are. And they're just different telltale signs. And I've had many spouses and many children say, "Oh no, dad's great. He's fine. Nothing wrong." I had one woman who's furious that I would even think her mother was having some cognitive issues. So, Ron, that's real stuff. And how do you recommend someone deal with that? Where maybe a spouse or a child who's just quite frankly in denial.
Well, I guess I would go back to what you just mentioned in terms of professionals, bringing in there. Thankfully, there are 4 very good groups that deal with dementia and Alzheimer's, and they can bring in people to do assessments. I mean, it's still tricky. It's still emotional, but again, use your medical professionals to bring them in, and they can. Your GP often will say, "Well, okay, maybe you should bring in a neurologist or a gerontologist at this point," and have them talk to the parents. Part of it too, I think, is to try to get a lot of the planning done before that happens. So it's important. It sometimes may be difficult to bring up, but if you can get down information before cognitive issues come to the fore, so you start talking to your parents about, look, hopefully this will not happen, but you need for the sake of your family, for the sake of your spouse, to aggregate this information, financial, estate planning, Even stuff about, I have a checklist of, what are the vital documents? Where are they? And what happens if, never mind the long-term cognitive issues, stuff happens,
Yeah.
that you can't predict. And all of a sudden, God, forbid, you get into an accident. And so, and then you become cognitively impaired, because you've had a fall, something you can't predict. Where's the healthcare proxy? And what are we supposed to do? So there are a few things that I think you can broach with your parents that make sense,
Hmm.
and that are not all necessarily older age related. Like, for example, you guys know this, I'm sure, but um, uh, people talk about, what do you need? You need a living will, you need a healthcare proxy, you need a durable power of attorney. But things like a healthcare proxy is not something just for when you get older. When your kid turns 18 and goes to college, he or she should have a healthcare proxy. There are those sorts of things that are basic family. They should be integrated into basic family planning.
Hmm.
Um, and it doesn't, negate your earlier point, Michael, that the most difficult issue is when you enter cognitive, incapacity later in life. It is difficult, but there are lots of resources to help you through that. And I have them locally, but I'm a volunteer educator for the Alzheimer's Association of Long Island. So there are lots of resources about training people how to talk to your loved one, how to communicate with them, how to deal with issues of disorientation, even things like how to have a conversation about taking away the keys,
Hmm.
when you realize they really shouldn't drive. Again, very difficult in suburbia, to get your parents to give. My mother voluntarily gave up her keys, but that's not often, not common.
Yeah, I had to have that conversation with my dad because he literally broke his ankle in half. I mean, literally, he had all his marbles, but his ankle was mangled. But he said to me, "Well, if you take away my car, you take away my independence." Right? So, yeah, so difficult conversations.
Yeah. Well, the good thing is that there are more resources these days. There is Uber and Lyft. There are ways to get around.
Yeah.
So there are more resources. Just like before, there were just a few options, for medical alert systems. Now there are a lot more, and there's a lot more technology that can help people take care of their older ones, even when they're
But
not on site.
the difficult part of this is that you want to be able to have the conversation with people when they are rational, right? When they do have all their cognitive skills, and you have the conversation like, well, I feel great. I can think, everything's fine, everything's wonderful. Why do I need to do anything? And the problem is you need to do stuff before something bad happens, right? And hope to God it never happens. And you try to get that message across that, hey, we hope you'll live to 100 and never have anything bad happen. But just in case, so getting them to make those decisions and think about it when they're healthy might be one of the biggest hurdles.
It is definitely one of the biggest hurdles, Dom. You're right. And I think that this is just a slow moving movement. I think we're getting there, but I think I don't want to, we can't kid ourselves that, oh, this is easy. It's not easy. I think it's part of a generational change. I think it'll come as part of living longer. The reality is going to hit us in the face, and I think they will come from the financial side first. I think that's what people will think about first. Like, what do people worry about? I'm going to run out of money. Okay, and why would I run out of money? Well, because my health would fail. And so you start helping your parents connect the dots and say, listen, and as I said before, it's emotional. I can't stress that enough. So it's not easy, but you have to do it patiently and with respect too. I mean, this is another thing where, people are saying, well, what do people really care about? This whole thing about all these things about nursing home scandals and stuff like that, and people talking about abuse and problems. And when you talk to people who are in nursing homes, and you say, well, what do you want? You want safety, you want dignity, and you want respect. And you want to be, even within these environments, you want as much independence as you can. So if you focus on, listen, mom and dad, what I want for you is the same thing you want for yourself. I want you to have as long a life as possible with safety, dignity, and security and respect. That's what the goal is here. It's not about your money that I want. Your money is your money. Whatever is left after you're taken care of for as long as possible, that's fine. So you have to have kids who think that, and you have to. So I was in charge of the trustee for my mother's irrevocable trust when she was on Medicaid. So that means that she has to trust me because I'm now entrusted with her money, and I've got to earn her trust and keep her trust. So that's another component of the emotion behind the financial decisions.
And you mentioned something before, which I think we deal with all the time, and that's the siblings. And you mentioned the alpha sibling. And the only problem with the alpha sibling is often you hear these stories, the alpha siblings in California or Florida or, 100 miles away in New Jersey, and they're pushing around the other sibling who's in the next town, who's really taking care of mom or dad. And then Dominick and I get the phone call, well, I love all my children equally, but it's really my daughter, Mary, who's been taking care of me, and therefore she's going to get my entire IRA. So I want to change my beneficiary. And all these things, they're so interconnected. And, and what advice would you give to siblings? Because I love that expression, the alpha sibling, but it doesn't always mean the person who's doing all the heavy lifting.
Absolutely. And it's tricky. So in my situation, guys, I was the main person, in charge of my mom's affairs. Okay. My mother chose me because she thought I was, probably the most suitable, emotionally, socially with my brothers. Okay. But it could have been other brothers. But the thing is, you do have to approach your client who is in charge and say, listen, you've got to pick the best person. Okay. Not the oldest person, not necessarily the alpha person, but so it's a difficult thing, but that person has to say, to gather the family. And sometimes it's better to do it in writing. Mm-hmm. So it's very clear. I'm choosing, and with an explanation, I am choosing Dominick because I believe that Dominick is the right person to do this, to be fairest in terms of, handling all these affairs that I need to make to live well, and that he will be fair in terms of working with all of you. Okay, I'm not doing this to diss anyone. I just need to pick one person. It's usually better to have one person. Sometimes you have two. It's not too good if they disagree. And what you can tell the loved one, the older loved one, and also the siblings is, listen, everyone can have a role. And that's what I tried to do. I said, everybody can have a role in this. You can't have the same role. The older brother in California is not on site, but there are things. So what can he do that somebody on site can't do? Someone who has the financial expertise or some other expertise. So, for example, my older brother was a medical doctor. Okay. He's retired now. Very smart guy. So when I would deal with medical issues, I would bring him in and say, listen, Blair, you're the guy on this. Figure out what the strengths are of each sibling and make them part of a team of caregivers, a caregiving team. And now it wasn't possible years ago, but now it is, where you can literally do what we're doing right now. Hey guys, we're gonna have a Zoom call. Everybody get on the call, and we'll make sure that everybody is sharing this. That's nothing. The technology now allows you to make sure that everybody is sharing the same information. That was a problem before, right? One sibling would talk to another, not the other one, blah blah blah. Now there's no excuse. Now there is technology that allows you to do this.
Wow, that's really powerful advice, Ron, because we see it all the time that maybe the best caregiver child is not the best financial advice child, right? So you have to be really careful who you assign these roles and responsibilities to, because both myself and Mike have witnessed where basically the child's going to be act the way they want to act and not really necessarily the way mom or dad wanted them to act.
Right. So part of it is, as you mentioned before, Dom, about bringing in professionals. So it's bringing in a professional to have a one-on-one with your client, or you having the client, and say, listen, Dorothy, you've got to be straight with me. Who is the best person? No one else is in the room now. You've got to pick that person who's going to do this. And then I'll help you kind of explain it to your children. And if you want, put it in a letter. We can figure out what responsibilities you want to divide up into different children. And often, and it's still not easy. You'll get the alpha male will say, "Oh boy, thanks a lot." And so the parent needs to be pretty disciplined about what's best for him or her. And in terms of also explaining sometimes to the adult children who have ideas about how to do things, it's like, you know what? You're not the client. Sorry. You're important. You're there to help your parents, and I appreciate your support. I appreciate your being the eyes on the situation. But my client is your mom or your dad. So let's recognize that. And I'm not gonna, and I'll speak to them. Then I'll speak to you with their permission.
So to that point, I'm glad you brought that up. I'm going to ask you to put your psychiatrist hat on. Frequently, there is a sibling or two they've vanished. They talk to mom every now and again. They're not really part of the family. They've just been detached from the family. And then all of a sudden, it's the end of mom and dad's life, and they come parachuting back in, and they want to become the alpha. And they want to be in charge. Smiling, Dominick, because I know we both deal with this.
Yeah, we've all been there, Mike. Both of us have been doing this for so long that we know we've seen it all before.
So what is your advice for the sibling who's been, as I said before, doing the heavy lifting, really being the one who's been taking care of the family, and then the older brother or sister, thinks they're coming in, and taking charge?
Well, that's why it's important, and whoever is, has been doing the heavy lifting, to make sure that their parent has this stuff in writing.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so you have to have this in writing, so that when the parachuter comes in, you hold it up and go, nope, sorry. I mean, I'm happy to listen to what you have to say, but I'm in charge. This is mom's will.
And that takes a very strong individual.
Yeah, it does. But that's why you need the writing, the imprimatur from your parent. Mm-hmm. It's not you trying to finesse them or to dominate them. This is your parents, your will, not literally will and testament, but this is what they wanted. So you're not acting on your own. You're doing your mother or father's bidding, and that sibling's going to have to live with it. And it is tough. I mean, there are situations where stuff like this happens, and especially when money, you guys know, comes into play, and somebody feels like they got dissed or they got shortchanged. It can be difficult, and sometimes families fall apart over estates.
We see it all the time.
Yeah, it's a shame. It's a shame, and you do the best you can earlier rather than later, in terms of, and again, it does come down to, your clients, the parents, having the discipline and stamina and will to lay this out and stick with it. This is not easy stuff, but that's what
Ron,
they need.
I want to switch gears just slightly, because I've had it now happen to me more than once, and I can think of 2, 3 off the top of my head, where the parents have done a really excellent job of doing the planning, creating the trust documents, everything you mentioned. And then they need help. They need to go into a home or have an aide come to the house. And the kids basically, because they're under this emotional trauma of watching their parents go, they're like, I don't care what planning they did. We're paying for everything. We're going to spend every nickel. I'm like, well, that wasn't really mom and dad's wishes, right? But they literally take that whole emotional upheaval that they're in the middle of, and maybe a lot of it, including guilt, and they throw that whole plan out the window.
Yeah.
Well, you witnessed this, right? Well, we don't care. We're spending whatever we got to spend, right?
Well, yeah. Sometimes I know we keep going back to this point about going to professionals, but that's why in some cases it's tricky. But the parent often needs to pick someone who is the trustee or an executor who is not in the family, who's the financial advisor. So that person can maintain neutrality and, as to go back to our word of rationality, and say, listen, I know you want to do this, but you're going to run out of money. Is that really what you want for your mom? You're going to run out. This is not sustainable. And it can get messy. It's not easy. But I think sometimes by bringing in an elder law attorney and empowering that person, or sometimes a team of the elder law attorney and the financial advisor, it's often better too if you can get, if either from the parent side or from the adult children's side, to basically have the team in place before something happens that skyrockets the emotion, so that you have, the financial advisor, the accountant, the elder law attorney, the minister or the rabbi, in place, so that you've because sometimes you do require a team. It's because the kids could gang up on one person, right? So I know a lot of this is tough stuff, and it's not like, oh, that'll solve it. It's a lot of these cases. It takes a lot of work to solve these situations, and to prepare. You just prepare. You got to prepare the best you can, and recognize that it's never optimal, or rarely optimal, and you've got to be prepared with alternate plans. Right.
Ron, let's talk about, we do all this planning. We've laid it all out. Everyone's gotten involved. Let's talk about D-Day. Let's talk about the day arrives where we got to find a place for mom or a place for dad. And we talked about this before the show started. We both had somewhat negative experiences with one or two agencies. It always seems, Ron, like it's just a cluster at the very end of putting it all together. And most importantly, as either you or Dom said, finding a place for your parent where there's going to be dignity and care, and give this person, your parent, all the resources that they deserve. Where do you even begin to start that process for that last step?
Well, I think that there are some templates in my caregiving guide, my Caregiving Navigator, that could help, and that is that what happens is that say your mom falls down and breaks her hip, and she goes into the hospital, and as you just pointed out, Michael, then they say, okay, she's got to leave. Got 24 hours. Got to find a place. You're like, what place? What? Well, here are 3 places, to try. So what my navigator tries to do is basically give you a template for that moment when your emotions are off the charts. So for example, in this case, it's like a list of questions. Okay, what do you need to know? What do you need to ask? What are the options? Where are the assisted, where can you find assisted living places? Because when I was faced with that situation, I didn't know where to start looking. So this, guide, so hopefully there is enough information in this guide, and sometimes too, hopefully some of your advisors, especially your elder law attorneys, can be really good resources, for having resources available and saying, okay, holy crap, I got to make a decision quickly on this. Um, at least, the questions I have, and attorneys, again, who can bring down the temperature and say, all right, let's wait a minute. Okay, let's figure this out one step by step. What do we need to do? And the questions that I lay out, and good attorneys can do as well, are basically things so that in your moment of high emotion and panic, you don't miss a step. That's the thing. These questions. So there's not a silver bullet, Michael, but there are ways that at least you can you can parachute into a situation, and with a little bit of guidance, bring down the level of panic and make a rational decision possible.
And we've kind of touched on it, but it's the emotional gripping scenario that gets people to make bad decisions, right? That
Right.
could be expensive decisions, maybe not necessarily in mom or dad's best health interests, right? So trying to do this in a very calm, rational manner in the middle of the storm is probably one of the more difficult situations.
Yeah, it is. There's no question about it. And again, so guides like mine, I'm not saying that there are other ways to find this information, but where you can get it just a little ahead of the situation, so you're not making a decision in a panic. As you guys know, just like when the market plunges, what do you say to people? What, don't sell. Like, wait a minute, stop, take a pause. So it's trying to create those pauses so people can take a few minutes, take a breath, and say, all right, wait a minute, what do we have to do? No, there are 27 things to do. Yeah, but what are the first 3 things to do? Okay, let's do that. Then we'll do that, and walk people through. And it, there is some, if you can, there is some planning you really should try to do ahead of time, even when you don't really want to, which is, even if if your parents are on Medicare, Medicaid, whatever, if they're but even if they're, if they're not in a facility, but if they're, they go into a skilled nursing facility, you've got to know, even if you're 45 and your parents are 70, you should know something about Medicare, even though you're not going to be on it, because you need to be able to make decisions with their financial advisors about how to handle certain things in Medicare. Because if they're in a facility, for example, and I'll just give a personal example. I was not aware that, even though I thought, oh, my mom has a policy, she's got a Medigap policy, so, and she's got, Medicaid, she's set, but I didn't realize that, there were limits to this. And I thought, well, she's on Medicare Part B, but she's got a Medigap policy. So if Medicare Part B doesn't cover it, then we got the gap policy. Not so. I found out the hard way that if the facility,
Not for a long-term care facility.
correct, and if they're not covered by Medicare Part B, Medigap doesn't cover it either. That was a very expensive lesson financially. So you should. You do have to kind of press your clients. Like, come on, you don't need to know everything, but try to figure out the few key things you should be prepared to examine.
The other thing that we see frequently, we talked about this with the elder care attorney, Harold Balachi, we had on, is also people frequently will make the gigantic financial mistake of getting things, assets, homes, real property investments out of the parent's name at the end of their life, right? So number one, it's not really going to accomplish anything because there's always a look back. But the other thing that they've done is they've given up a potentially valuable tax benefit for themselves and their siblings, because now you don't get what's called the step up in basis. So there are so many different angles to look at these decisions that I'm glad you wrote this book, because it is overwhelming.
Right. Yeah. And I tried to do it, guys, in a logical way too, in spite of all the emotion, which is step 1, preparation and planning, financial health planning. Step 2, what about when your parents are aging in place?
I think we just lost him. Hopefully he'll be back.
Well, look, hopefully he'll be back, but if we can pick up the ball right there, Mike, the key is planning. The key is to think about all this stuff when you don't need it, when it's not even on the horizon yet, when you're thinking logically, when the kids are not emotionally enthralled or upset or grasping because, God forbid, something happened to mom or dad. If you can make some rational, common sense decisions when things are calm, you usually end up with a better result.
Yeah, absolutely. I think Ron's back now.
Yep.
Ron, could you hear us?
Yep, I can, guys. Yep.
So we were just talking about how planning how important the planning was. And again, I love, maybe you should have named your book, The Planning Deficit Disorder Solutions. But Ron, why don't you tell our listeners, and hopefully your listeners, I know you're going to redistribute this podcast. When is your show on, and how do people get the book, The Caregiver Navigator?
Right. Okay. Well, for my show 45 Forward is on Voice America Network. So that's voiceamerica.com. You click on 45 Forward. It's on Monday afternoons at 3:00 live Eastern time, noon Pacific time. But, just like you guys, after the show records, they could listen to it as a podcast anytime by just clicking on Voice America. The Caregiving Navigator I'm going through actually final edits now. It's been a long process, actually almost 10 years from the, initial conception. But it's going to be already within a few months, and you can get it it'll be available on it's called caregivingnav.com. That's going to be my website where people can get it, and they'll get it on Amazon as well.
And what's your own website? Because I know you have a newsletter as well.
Right. It's roelresources.com, ROEL resources.com. And people can message me at ron.roel@gmail.com and get more information about if they can't find the navigator when they need it, or they want more information about me or my show. I'll always respond, and we can, carry on the conversation.
Ron, I think our producer, Andrew, was enthralled with your conversation, because we didn't take a break and he ran you right through the end. So, we appreciate your time this evening, and we're out of time.
Well, it's a pleasure, guys.
Great advice, Ron, and thank you. I know this is a subject we could probably talk for hours on, so maybe we'll have you back when the book actually comes out. I'd love to continue, but I think you gave some pretty good advice to people, and hopefully they take us up on it.
Great, and I appreciate being here, guys. It's fairly important, and I feel like you can't spread the word enough.
Thank you.
We agree. So Dom and I will be back next Friday, and have a good night.